I tell you my truth, little one? How can I tell you the things I have done? Though I cannot see the sky, you know, I only think of you. And you shine for me more brightly than the sun. And how can I tell you the tears I have shed? Are you still lonely each night in your bed? I could tell you to forget me, but the words would not be true. And I love you always, even if you do. I am weakness, I am mother. We are part of one another. I am stronger and more hopeful than it seems. And my story is your story that I sent you from a prison with 1,000 tender kisses for your dreams. For the mothers and the daughters and the children, I am strong. I am weakness, I am mother. We are born of one another. I am stronger and more hopeful than it seems. And my story is your story that I sent you from my prison with 1,000 tender kisses for your dreams. This is my story with love, Nazarene.
The stirring song that you just heard entering the chat, How Can I Tell You, was written for the Nasrin film by Academy Award nominees and Tony Award winners Lynn Ahrens and Stephen Flaherty, performed by Benin-born singer and activist Angelique Kidjo. Time magazine called Kidjo Africa's premier diva. The lyrics of the song, which we'll play again during the intermission, based on heart-wrenching letters that Nasrin Sotoudeh wrote to her 2 young children while in prison. Welcome everyone to Baha'i Chat, a conversation series dedicated to our interconnectedness. It's an uplifting moment when we can turn our thoughts to spiritual ideas. Each session is rooted in the Baha'i writings and the fundamental teachings of the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, and the oneness of mankind, led by individuals who are putting these principles into action. The urgent and universal call to individual action for each human being, first to our recognizing the irrefutable truth of our essential oneness, and then to acting in a manner that moves us collectively toward unity, is perhaps most elegantly implied in a simple assurance gifted to us by a prisoner and exile who penned this a century and a half ago. So powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth. The Baha'i faith is the youngest of the independent world religions, born in the middle of the 19th century. Its prophet founder, Baha'u'llah, an Arabic term meaning the glory of God, claimed to fulfill all of the prophecies found in the scriptures of each of the previously established world religions, prophecies alluding to the one who would appear at a time of great turmoil and upheaval, but whose teachings would ultimately establish the long-awaited kingdom of God on earth, uniting all mankind, regardless of race, creed, ethnicity, national origin, any of those man-made barriers that we have over the centuries erected to other one another in order to gain ascendancy. The Baha'i faith was born in Iran, where some 20,000 of its early believers were put to death in less than a decade. Today, the Baha'is of Iran comprise the largest community of all non-Muslim minorities, and that persecution continues in a variety of terribly oppressive ways. Baha'u'llah himself gave up his birthright of affluence to spend the 40 years of his ministry as a prisoner, facing 4 successive exiles, during which time he revealed thousands of prayers and tablets comprising some 100 volumes of writings. Much of these works have already been translated into over 800 languages as the faith has spread at unprecedented speed to virtually every corner of the world. Central to the Baha'i faith is the teaching of the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, and the oneness of mankind, the ultimate establishment of its fundamental principles, which include the equality of men and women, the elimination of the extremes of wealth and poverty, the abolition of prejudice, just to name a few, rest upon the prerequisite of justice. Baha'u'llah writes in his hidden words, revealed in 1858, "O son of spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes." Without justice, there can be no unity, and without unity, there can be no peace. Today, we'll be talking about Nasrin Sotoudeh, the extraordinary woman who is the subject of a new documentary, Nasrin. Sotoudeh is not a Baha'i, but her life has been all about the pursuit of justice, sacrificing health, liberty, personal comfort. In a most powerful expression of her understanding of our essential oneness, she has dauntlessly defended the rights of those of her fellow countrymen, regardless of background, who have been marginalized by an oppressive regime. A human rights attorney, Nasrin has, for a quarter century, fought for some of Iran's most sensitive causes: the rights of women, children on death row, endangered minorities, including the Baha'is. She's won international acclaim, but her defiance has come at a heavy personal price. She is today serving a 38-year-long prison sentence for absurdly styled national security crimes after defending women who simply protested Iran's compulsory head covering law. We're joined today by filmmakers Jeff Kaufman and Marcia Ross, Payam Akhavan, and Mojdeh Rohani. Payam, his tireless life's work mirrors closely that of Nasrin, a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, professor of international law at the University of Toronto, with prior appointments at McGill, Yale, Oxford, and Paris. He was previously UN prosecutor at The Hague, served with the UN in Bosnia, Rwanda, Guatemala, and Cambodia, and appeared as counsel before the International Court of Justice on behalf of genocide survivors. He is co-founder of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center and author of numerous publications, including his best-selling memoir, In Search of a Better World, A Human Rights Odyssey. Payam, it's such a privilege and honor really to have you with us today. Welcome to the chat.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you for your invitation.
So glad to have you here. Our next guest, Mojdeh Rohani, was one of the first graduates of the Baha'i Institute for Higher Education, an ad hoc university created by the Baha'is in Iran to serve the community's youth who have for the past 40 years been denied the right to higher education. With a BA in psychology from the BHA, she continued her graduate studies in social work. Today, she serves as the executive director of Novo and adjunct faculty at Boston University School of Social Work. Her father was a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Iran. He was executed along with 8 of his colleagues on December 27, 1981. Mojdeh, it is just wonderful to see you again. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.
Our next guests are dear friends and very close to my heart. They are in every way a team, and so I've combined their bios. Jeff Kaufman is an Emmy Award nominated documentary writer, director, and producer. He, together with his lovely wife, Marcia Ross, have created the documentaries Every Act of Life, The State of Marriage, Father Joseph, The Savoy King. Kaufman has also written, directed, and produced The Art of Being Edward Bieberman and Education Under Fire, as well as a number of short films for Amnesty International and programs for the Discovery and History channels. Marcia, in her earlier career spanning 3 decades, served as an award-winning independent casting director and executive with Walt Disney Pictures and Warner Brothers TV. Her film and television credits include Clueless, Cujo, 30-something, Murder in Mississippi, 10 Things I Hate About You, The Princess Diaries, and so many others, too many to mention. I'm delighted to add that I have the honor of serving with Marcia as fellow directors of the Raising Haiti Foundation. Marcia and Jeff, welcome to the chat.
Hi, David. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here.
Hi, David.
Hello, Jeff.
Good to see you, Payam and Mojdeh and Marcia.
Absolutely.
You too.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to start with you, Payam. Nasrin has recently been referred to as Iran's Mandela. Put this into context for us. What makes her selfless work so important, both in the context of Iran and also internationally?
Thank you for that question, David. And before responding, I just wanted to briefly congratulate Jeff and Marcia for an extraordinary film about an extraordinary woman. And I really wish you much success in getting this remarkable story, a story that the world must hear for so many reasons. Which goes to your question, David. Nasrin, Iran's Nelson Mandela. In the same way as Nelson Mandela personified a better future for South Africa, Nasrin personifies a better future for the long-suffering people of Iran. Nelson Mandela, after 27 years of injustice and imprisonment, left the prison not full of vengeance for those that had tormented him, but full of compassion and forgiveness. And in that sense, rather than replicating the same cycle of violence, he showed us that it is possible to rebuild even this deeply racist and violent society based on human dignity and a shared humanity. And that is exactly what Nasrin is doing us. This unassuming mother of 2 lovely children, this neighborhood lawyer who we would perhaps walk by on the street barely noticing, has thrown the powerful, mighty forces of the Islamic Republic into disarray. And it's remarkable that a regime which so much wealth, so many resources at its disposal, feels so threatened by Nasrin. So I would begin by saying that Nasrin isn't merely speaking truth to power. She is giving us a new conception of power. She may be the prisoner, but in fact, I would say that those who are tormenting her are in their own prison, the prison of delusions, intoxicated by violence, corruption, fanaticism, and the fact that they cannot break her, the fact that they cannot crush her spirit, they cannot silence her, shows us the astonishing resilience of the human spirit. And that is a story not just for the people of Iran, but for people everywhere who fight for a better future. So once again, I congratulate Marcia and Jeff. It is very sad that as we speak today, Nasrin is back in prison, having been released on furlough for a few days, but that makes this film and this story that much more important.
Thank you so much for that, Payam. And following up on that, Marcia, Nasrin has been a target of the government for years. She has served multiple prison terms, always for her work as a lawyer, advocating for the rights of those whose rights have been trampled, this time receiving a 38-year prison term for defending women who, in simple nonviolent protest, refused to wear the hijab, Iran's legally mandatory head covering. As a woman, what are your thoughts about her courage and resilience, risking her life, liberty, her comfort, being away from her family, to defend her fellow Iranian women at such personal expense?
You know, she's a remarkable individual and a unique person. I have to say that, you know, particularly having gotten to see her again since she's been in and out of prison for the couple of medical furloughs she's had, her spirit is remarkably strong and positive. And as a mother myself, you know, I had a lot of questions about that. It was really important for me to understand because I don't, you know, I'm a fairly politically active person, but what Nasrin does is way beyond something I think I could do. And so I had to come to understand that this is not a sacrifice for her. And it's also not a sacrifice for the other women. They believe in what they're doing at such a deep level, that what they're doing for the future of their children, their own children, the country, the other people's children, as an example for other young women, is above and beyond sort of thinking of themselves first. It's a calling they have. I can't even put it in any other way. And it's very admirable because I think, you know, without people willing to put themselves out, there is no change in society. And it's a very oppressive society, particularly to women. And I think Nasrin puts it so well. I mean, the forcing of women to wear the hijab is just a way to control how women think, what they wear. I mean, it's much deeper than, as she says, you know, this piece of fabric. And, you know, as I think as an American woman in this country, particularly over the last years of making the film, you know, I spent a lot of time, and I still do, a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen to our rights here. You know, because that can happen in a society. We see it happen there. And there are a lot of people in the United States that would be very happy to take away the voices of women, and everybody, but the voices of women, and control a lot of things about women. And so I think she's not just a role model for people within Iran, but I think for people around the world who want to have a voice and make a difference.
Mojdeh, it's so wonderful to see you again. It's been a while to have you join this discussion. You've personally experienced so much hardship as a Baha'i in Iran. And I'd like to share a clip from Education Under Fire, and then let's talk about it.
They can take away the books, they can take away all the equipment, the computers, everything. But the knowledge is in the head, is in the brain. The government can crush our bodies, but they cannot crush the mind and soul.
During the Shah, there was persecution of Baha'is, but it was limited. After the revolution, it became the hidden agenda of the government to deprive Baha'is from any cultural or economical progress. They expelled all the Baha'i professors from universities, and Baha'i students could not finish their educations. Baha'is were not allowed to work for government, state-related jobs. Baha'is lost some of their properties and were arrested. And there were more than 200 Baha'is which were executed in the 1980s.
My father was a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Iran. And in 1981, he was arrested, and in a very short span of time, he was executed along with 7 other of his colleagues. So yes, it was very cruel and it was heartbreaking, but at the same time, I really see the root cause of it as ignorance.
That piece is just so powerful. I mean, you have experienced multiple variations of this oppression really from from your childhood and into your teens and young adulthood. Tell us a bit about your experience as a girl and a young woman, a Baha'i growing up in Iran, the loss of your father. I mean, an esteemed member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Iran, abducted, all of them early into the current regime's power. Talk a little bit about that and your struggles to receive an education.
Yeah, it would be a long story if I want to go back all the way, but I'll just try to be brief. Of course, as you can imagine, it was not easy as a child to have had the experiences that not only I had, but the rest of the Baha'i community, everybody along with me, which made us really into a big family at the same time. But of course, I think what I learned later on in life, not to focus so much on the difficulty of those years. After I left Iran and I came to the US, I came here. I left Iran in 95 and came here in 96 as a refugee. And I learned that because of the persecutions and restrictions, we were very limited to our own small world of basically the Baha'i community and not really in touch with the world outside of Iran. And at that time, we didn't have the social media, the internet. It wasn't the same way it is now. And what I learned personally was that I was very much focused on my own pain, probably up to that point. And the learning for me was that we cannot continue, or speaking personally, I cannot continue to think of myself as a victim. And this is not how we can change things. Either we can remain upset, angry, and revengeful and be bitter, or we can choose a different path and be able to look beyond that and to see that it's not just me or my group who has pain and suffering in this world, and to be able to go beyond your pain and through that be able to relate to the pain of others in the world and really see their issues as your own. And I really believe that's the only way you can bring about change. This is why I focus my education and my work on trauma work, on torture treatment, on impunity, not just for anyone who's in Iran, but as I said, it could be any corner of the world. And to me, that's the only way we can bring about change in our world.
Your life has been an example. You're a social worker now, and much of your work centered on refugee and immigrant youth.
Adults, maybe, asylum seekers, and also refugees overseas in different countries.
And there's no doubt, I'm sure, that your experience in coming through that pain has definitely inspired those life choices.
Yeah, as I said, certainly, I mean, there was an option before me, and I could have remained in the role of a victim or remained angry and bitter. Not to say that I was not angry or bitter or sad. Of course you are. That's what trauma does, and it's important to acknowledge that and to process that. But then you learn to grow out of that, and you have to decide. It's a conscious decision of what do I want to do with this? Where do I want to go with it? How can I contribute to the betterment of my world? If what happened to me is not something that I liked, then let's just do something about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I want to bring Jeff on just for a minute and really echo what Payam said, both to you, Jeff, and Marcia. Just kudos for the creation of this film. You and I go back a long way, and it's really just wonderful to share this space with you. Before we take a deep dive, let's take a look at a clip. Why don't you set it up for us?
This clip. Sure. First of all, I just have to say that, one of the messages of Baha'i Chat is finding unity among people across multiple barriers. That was certainly a goal for us in this film. But think about Nasrin. She's in a prison cell right now, a really horrible prison cell right now. And yet this woman, as Payam was saying, has this power to bring people together, to create this film, to campaign on her behalf, to support others like her. That woman is bringing us all together. And it is amazing the power of individuals with big hearts to bring people together and to try to make the world a better place. And that's just, how can you not be inspired? So, to set up this clip that we're about to see. After we did Education Under Fire, there were so many elements that stayed with me, as they are, with every project you do, but maybe especially so. And one of the things I loved about the process of making that film was hearing Baha'is from Iran talk about how often Muslim neighbors would put themselves at risk to help them, either getting them smuggling them into a class at Tehran University, or opening a business under their name so that they could support their families. And those relatively seemingly small acts would put those Muslim families, those Muslim individuals at enormous risk. And I just love that idea of crossing from one faith to the other with mutual understanding. I just even saying it gives me chills, because I feel that's what we need in this world. And I kept trying to find different ways to go back to that story and that inspiration. And there's just no one better for me than Nasrin Sotoudeh, who has put herself at risk so often as a Muslim woman to support not only Baha'is, but Zoroastrians and people of all faiths and backgrounds in Iran. It's very inspiring. And she's done that over and over and over again. We can talk about it more later. But so we wanted to express that. And her support of the Baha'is comes up several times in the film. But there's one significant scene where she speaks about a family who is a father, a good community member who was a Baha'i, was killed simply for being a Baha'i. And there were basically no legal repercussions against those who killed him. And so this scene is Nasrin actually talking to the father of those two young men who killed him. And it'll speak for itself. I guess the only thing I could say is that I've been thinking about this for a long time, and there was a sort of a gap in the film where I was trying to tell this part, and one night I couldn't sleep, so I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden I said, "Wait a minute, we could do this," and that was sort of how this scene came to play. So I guess from there we can start.
متاسفانه این روزا با پرونده‌های متعددی درگیرم که ذهنمو مشغول کرده، از جمله خانواده آقای امیری از هموطنان بهایی بود که سال گذشته همین موقع‌ها در شهر خودشون یزد به قتل رسید. 2 برادر خیلی پاک، خیلی معتقد گفتن که ما فقط برای رضای خدا این کارو کردیم. این 2 برادر بعد از 6 ماه دستگیری از زندان آزاد شدن.
اگر اینها بیان در مورد کار خودشون یه اعلان عمومی بکنن و ضمن اینکه بگن به هر حال باید عقاید همه محترم شمرده بشه و نباید کسی رو به دلیل اعتقادش از زندگی محروم کرد، آیا این راهی رو باز نمی‌کنه برای ما که به هر حال به این داستان‌های تلخ پایان بدیم؟ شما پدر اون 2 برادری هستید که مرحوم امیری به اتهام بهایی بودن به قتل رسونده بودن. چیزی که برای من کمی باعث تعجبه، ببینید این کار پسرای شما امنیت تک تک ما رو به خطر انداخته، یعنی پای مرگ و زندگی همه ما. خب حالا این نظر شما هستش، ولی جناب آقای کنوی، من یه چیزی رو هم مایلم به شما یادآوری بکنم. ببینید شما پارسال فکر میکنید این خانواده وقتی این اتفاق براش افتاده چه حالی داشته؟ من طبعا احساس شما رو به عنوان یه پدر درک میکنم که خانواده شما، پسران شما الان 1 ساله در نتیجه همین سیاست‌های غلط همین نظام واقعا به شما داره فشار میاد. اینو من طبعا درک میکنم، اما شما در نظر بگیرید این اتفاق برای اون خانواده افتاده، پسران شما که اون تو بودن بعد چند ماه هم آزاد شدن، میتونید خودتون رو یک لحظه جای اون خانواده بذارید؟ هم بتونیم که به هر حال بابت این اشتباه پسران شما ما بتونیم یه تصمیم شایسته بگیریم، اون همه بی‌عدالتی که در این حکم هست یه جوری به هر حال جبران بشه. چشم، من باهاتون خداحافظی میکنم و اینو پیگیری میکنم. قربان شما.
Wow, that amazing clip. And it really brings us full circle. You're not a Baha'i, but you have passionately defended the Baha'is of Iran. I'll never forget when I flew to LA to meet you for the first time, Casey Porter had introduced us, and the local assembly there had pulled together this roster. I couldn't imagine that there were so many people in one location, Baha'is, expatriates from Iran, who had, like Mojdeh, family members executed or imprisoned for years. And they began to tell their stories. And I watched you. I mean, I could see its impact on you. And then later, when we did Education Under Fire together, again, the same thing. Your passion for what's right and your heart was so evident to me in the process, and it's so evident in your filmmaking. What I'd like you to do is talk a little bit about kind of the connection. I know you made some films about Iran even prior to our meeting, but particularly with Angels of Iran and Education Under Fire, sort of the through line that took you to making Nasrin.
Sure. And David, it's been just a great pleasure to know you and work with you. And, again, the fact, Mojdeh was talking about how pain can lead to growth and doing something positive. So the fact that these people's stories can connect us and set us on a path towards trying to do something positive, is really what you want. And I have to say, there's another side of unity, and that is that I remember doing this project where I was talking to victims of torture in Chile, and what they described that they went through so closely mirrored what I've heard victims of torture in Iran describe. And so, what is it about humans that can be both so incredibly inspiring and lift you up in such a wonderful way, and then also so brutal about other human beings? Maybe I'll never get my head around that. It's just you get lifted and dashed at the same time. But Marcia's talked about this before. I think all of our films whether it's about jazz and horror in the 1930s, or it's about this great playwright, Terrence McNally, or we did a film about the women who really launched the whole marriage equality movement. It's all about people who sort of have this vision. They may not have the recognition that they deserve, but their efforts end up creating this community that comes together to do something remarkable. And so it just becomes a privilege for us to try to tell their story. We also did a film back in February, which seems like a lifetime ago, for Time Magazine, about the women's rights movement in Iran. And again, just telling the story about these incredibly resilient women. Some we know, some become like faces in photos and video, but just all so strong and so inspiring. And despite being pushed down and pushed down and pushed down, still saying, we deserve our rights. And not just as a gift from the government, but in the law, protected as equals. And if they can keep getting up and doing that, we better keep doing it too.
You have plenty of subject material in this world, right?
Yeah.
I want to bring Payam into this as well. Like Mojdeh, as a child of a Baha'i family in Iran, you were a religious refugee. You went on to receive your doctorate from Harvard Law School. You could have practiced in any lucrative field of law at any law firm, and yet you chose, like Nasrin, to become a human rights lawyer. And in your just extraordinary career, you found yourself grappling with very challenging human rights cases in countries across the planet. In your book, In Search of a Better World, A Human Rights Odyssey, you share personal stories and stories of others that you've encountered in your work. You highlight moments filled with heartbreaking horror, but also compassion, and sweetest of all, I think, you pay tribute to the human spirit. So what is the impulse that you share with Nasrin, with Mojdeh, with Jeff and Marcia, with so many, and in your case, having faced just so much trauma yourself as a child, not to tune out the overwhelming horrors of our times, but rather to intervene for others, to play your part?
Thank you for that question, David. I like to say that I did not choose a human rights career. A human rights career chose me. And we all have, very different stories. And I cannot imagine what it would have been like for Mojdeh to have lost her father, for the children of Nasrin to see their mother imprisoned. And it's really important to understand that behind every victim, there is a name, there is a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a universe of relations forever destroyed. Because when we speak about human rights as an abstraction, we never understand the intimate reality of grief and suffering. And I think that as Mojdeh was saying, when you are afflicted with injustice, and we all have our own stories, we all have our own journeys, you have a choice. One choice is to be overwhelmed by grief and bitterness, and the kind of self-destruction that we see all around us, whether it's substance abuse, lashing out. But it also reminds me of that beautiful poem of Rumi, who says that the wound is where the light enters you. And we can only see the astonishing resilience of the human spirit in darkness, which is a remarkable paradox, because we live in a culture, consumerist culture, which is all about self-indulgence and ease and comfort. So this is perhaps why we're inspired by people like Nasrin, because Nasrin is inspiring. She shows us that a woman who seems so ordinary on the outside has this incredible, extraordinary power, and that the light of her spirit cannot be quenched even by this mighty tyrannical government. And it's a universal story because it teaches every one of us our own agency, our own power, and the importance of the choices that we make. And if I may just say one last thing, I don't want to take too much of your time. I think we have to, reflecting on that clip, I'm sure all of us obviously are a sense of grief and rage at the family whose loved ones was killed out of sheer blind hatred. but you also in some way maybe feel sorry for those who are ignorant enough to kill a perfectly innocent man. And then the shame of the father whose sons have committed murder in the name of the divine, in the name of that which is sacred. And it reminds me of that famous statement of Jean-Paul Sartre, who said that, in speaking of anti-Semitism and the hatred of Jews, he said, the Jew exists in the mind of the anti-Semite. If the Jew did not exist, the anti-Semite would invent him. So this is always the story of hatred. The Baha'i exists in the mind of the fanatic who needs to create of the Baha'i a monster so that he can reaffirm his own weak, fragile self. Violence and hatred not only denies the humanity of the victim, but it denies the humanity of the perpetrator as well. It is the most profound sign of weakness. Putting a woman who is defending the rights of other women to dress as they wish into prison for 38 years is the most pathetic, profound sign of weakness. And the strength of a woman who stands firm in the face of such punishment, that is the true conception of power. So I think that there is a much deeper universal story here about the power of spiritual transformation. Something which is very difficult to understand in our culture of superficial, platitudes and self-indulgence, that through suffering, we have the power, if we have that depth and determination, to, in effect, realize our true potential as human beings.
I don't want anybody to feel like this is a one-off question and each person, take it. If you're inspired, really, please, jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to add something because I was thinking, Payam, what you were saying, because James Baldwin, the great James Baldwin, said almost the exact same thing about, the treatment of Black people in America. I mean, this is almost verbatim what he said. And I think, thinking back about what you were saying, I was very moved at the beginning, David, because I think until we understand our common humanity, people are always being turned against people. And it's a very troubling thing. And all cultures do it. I mean, anti-Semites throughout history, have persecuted Jews. And actually, I'm Jewish, and one of the things for Jews who were constantly being thrown out of places was, you can only take what's up here. And so education became really, really important wherever Jewish people went, because they could not take any of their possessions. They were cast out of various countries. But it goes throughout history, and it's a constant sort of use by power in a very weak way to manipulate people and to separate people so that people don't feel that we're all really exactly the same.
There's something that Nasrin says in that clip that is so simple. And I remember when I first heard it, I thought, oh, that phrase is in Farsi and Persian as well. And that's where she says, try walking in their shoes. Try walking in their shoes. And it seems so simple, but it also, for some reason, for so many, is so hard. But I think we should all try to do that.
Yeah, Mojdeh, I want to ask you just, as an Iranian woman facing so much trauma, just sort of thinking back to Nasrin, these sort of sacrifices, what do you think that it means to the Iranian women and really the entire population? There's got to be hope generated there, seeing her life. Talk about that a little bit. You're unmuted.
Absolutely. Well, Nasrin is a role model, really, for the generations, I would say, of Iranian women, but particularly the young generation. Even as you can see in one section of the movie, when this young woman comes out of Qarchak Prison, where Nasrin is now, and she was the one who took away her hijab and was arrested, and Nasrin helped, free her from prison. And she kept saying, this young woman, that believe me that I could have never done it hadn't it been because of women like you. I never would have found the courage. It wasn't me, it was you who gave me the courage and the idea to stand up for something that matters. And this is what Nasrin has done. So this wave of activism that you see, and also this movement towards the rights of women in Iran, it owes to a large part to Nasrin and also many of her colleagues, who have done this amazing job. Having lived myself in that environment, I can just tell you how scary it is for someone like Nasrin, or for anyone who just freely, without any fear, defend, even speak, never mind defending, about the right of others, be it the Kurds, be it the women, children on death row, Baha'is. For a Muslim to even mention the name Baha'i, it really requires a lot of courage. So Nasrin and her friends, or another attorney that I would like to mention here, Mr. Abdul Fattah Soltani, they are real heroes. They have sacrificed so much, and probably the understanding of their sacrifice and courage just has a deeper meaning for us who have lived under those oppressive circumstances and realize what it takes to do what they have done for us.
Thank you for that. This is really such a rich conversation. And one of the things, Jeff, that really strikes me about the film, and I saw this in your painstaking creation of Education Under Fire, and I really fell in love with this aspect of your work, that while you're deservedly very critical of the policies of the Iranian government, you really do just a lovely, lovely job making us feel the humanity of the Iranian people, tasting their culture of warmth and hospitality, something I know more than a little bit about, being married to a beautiful Iranian woman for 35 years, and you know her. You even touch on their proud history before present times, and in just such a respectful manner. There's so much anti-Iranian sentiment, Islamophobia in the United States now, and I think that your sensitivity in that regard is remarkable. And I'm sure that this element is a very conscious choice on your part as filmmaker. Talk about that.
Thank you for bringing it up. I mean, from the very beginning, it was a goal of Marcia and me to use this film rightly, through Nasrin, as a way to pay tribute to the Iranian people. And it's really important to realize that, the government and the people are not the same thing. We had many conversations with Nasrin as we were making the film. We'd have these Zoom chats, and I can't tell how many times I would say, Elizabeth, I'm really so sorry about what Trump just did or what we just did or whatever. And there was this sense that there's hardliners in both countries that want to have conflict, that thrive on conflict, that want to have war. That doesn't really reflect the heart of the people. So we're also just blessed that Nasrin is someone who loves culture and loves the arts. And there's a moment in the film where right after she got out of prison the first time in 2013, she went to this arts gathering, and she talked about what the arts mean to her. And she said, art is the best way to take down tyranny. Art is the best way to challenge the tyrant. And so she took us, thanks to these amazing filmmakers that were following her through Tehran streets. She took us into a theater. She took it, there was like a Greenwich Village theater, a production of Errol Dorfman's Death of the Maiden. She took us to an art gallery. There's only one art gallery we have in the film, but we actually went with her to 3 or 4 art galleries and to, just the bookstores. There's just, the arts are very important to Nasrin. And it was really important for us, as you said, to counter that demonization and to show what a rich culture there is in Iran and how rich and deep the people are.
Yeah, and I think it's so cool. People may not know, there are a lot of heroes connected to the film. You have a film crew of Iranians who are anonymous because, and still they could be found out, but if they were to be named, they would probably suffer immediately the same fate that, as we know, many filmmakers in Iran have, as did Nasrin. And, you know, they themselves are taking risk. And the fact that you organized this and that it came together, I think it was just, you know, it was fate that this would happen, that you would direct and produce this film, never setting foot in Iran, and some of the crew members, I think you told me, you know who some of them are and some of them you don't. And that's extraordinary.
I don't want to talk too much, but let me just say that for instance, one of the filmmakers had to flee the country, not because of the film, but because of her other work, and she's at risk now. There's one of the photographers who we do acknowledge in the film. If you remember, there's a sequence where Nasrin hasn't physically seen her husband for 3 or 4 years. She's been in prison and she goes to court. She's only been able to see him behind glass. And so the first time she actually sees him in person after 3 years is on the steps of this courthouse. And there's a series of about 8 photographs where her hands in handcuffs go up in the air and then over her husband's neck, and they embrace and they have a smile that will just light you up. And the woman who took those photographs was arrested about 2.5, 3 months ago because she had attended a conference on women in democracy in Iran. Yeah, these people are incredibly inspiring, and they also reflect the fact that there are so many people at risk, and everything we do for Nasrin is actually for them as well.
It was mentioned before, sort of the connection with this conversation and what's happening with the racial lack of justice issue in this country. So I'm going to bring the conversation a little bit closer to home. And first, Payam, but I think, for all of you here in the United States, we have been, in the midst of serious threats to our democracy. Part of the recent upheavals, not a small part either, revolving around flare-ups in our age-old national sin of systemic racism and white supremacy. So what lessons can we take from, well, first to you, Payam, from your experience on the world stage dealing with human rights abuses, the myriad systemic injustices faced by so many millions? How do we begin to cure our own national ills and avoid falling deeper into the abyss?
Thank you for that question, David. It's famously said, all that it takes for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Mm-hmm. The great evils of our time do not happen because there are small groups of fanatics and extremists and hateful individuals. It's because of the apathy of the masses. So I have seen time and again in my work with the United Nations, in Yugoslavia and Rwanda and many other corners of the world, how demagogical leaders have promised the great utopia to their people, and in doing so, walk them over the edge of the cliff into a dark abyss of hatred and violence and self-destruction. And I think that maybe we have become a bit too smug and arrogant in the Western liberal world to think that somehow we are immune from the same corrosive forces. We are not. And perhaps that was a wake-up call. And it's not about partisan politics. It's a fundamental question of building a culture on justice and human dignity. And there must be a bottom line. There must be some fundamental principles that bring us together. And if we cannot accept that basic empathy, which goes back to Nasrin's call to the father whose sons have murdered the Baha'i, it's about empathy. As Jeff said, put yourself in their shoes. So to me, the challenge to us in the United States, in my country, Canada, and all over the world is twofold. One is that we need to learn empathy. We need to understand that we are not properly, we don't have the right to call ourselves human beings if we cannot feel the pain and suffering of others. That is the beginning of our journey towards becoming a human being. And more broadly, we need to realize that we are at a unique point in humankind's evolution, historical evolution, from a world beset with divisive identities and ideologies to the unification of all peoples in one world civilization. For me to say we are inextricably interdependent is not a fit of naive idealism. It is to state what is blindingly obvious. We live in a world that is inextricably interdependent. And in this volatile transition from the old world of familiar divides that we knew to this new all-embracing civilization, there may be the leaders that, in a fit of what I would consider a kind of cataclysm of infantile regression, want to bring us back to that imaginary world where everything was safe and familiar. Well, guess what? We cannot go back into our mother's womb. That world is long gone. We now live in a world which is, the boundaries of which are the entire planet, whether we like it or not. So to me, I think on the one hand, we need to be vigilant against these prophets of doom and destruction and division who give us a simple answer in a world that is increasingly complicated. But I also think there is a message of hope. We can be serene and confident that the future will stand with those who embrace all humankind with this unified vision. And the hissy fit of the identity warriors will be relegated to the trash bin of history. I think we can be confident in that consciousness.
Thank you for that. We have just a few minutes left before we take our break, and we're going to come back right after that. We have a 3-minute musical intermission.
Let me say something that seems self-serving, but it's really not. That is that people can find out more about Nasrin Sotoudeh and how to support her, and also how to see the film, which is really important, by going to a certain website. And I should tell you that both because Nasrin and Reza would say that the film has become an essential way to amplify their voice and to give her the protection she needs to do her work. And so we obviously hope that everyone sees the film, and it's going to be available on Amazon and iTunes and all sorts of places like that as of Tuesday. So you can go to www.nasrinfilm.com. That's www.nasrinfilm.com. And there's a lot more information about Nasrin. There's a link to the song that you're going to play. There's a way to communicate with us. And we just hope that you'll do that and share that with your friends. And anyone who cares about any of this, we hope that you'll see the film on video on demand starting on Tuesday. And that's a direct connection to Nasrin.
Can I add one thing? Because there's a question I was just about to answer in the chat, because we have a lot of international guests today. And the film has a slightly different trajectory abroad because it's being sold for television in country by country. So that VOD is only going to be in North America, but on April 1st, the film is going to be available around the whole rest of the world in every other country. I think someone was asking about the Ukraine and Europe. The film will be available April 1st on Amazon and all other streaming services then. Go to the website, sign up. We do newsletters, and we have a watch section, which means you can go there, and we do constant updates about where you will be able to see the film or how to link you to how you can see the film.
And that was not self-serving. I was about to go there, and I'm so glad that you did. There's also a petition on that website. Tell us a little bit about that. And we've posted the link in the chat. So copy that link, and but tell us a little bit about the petition and anything else folks can do to help.
We've had so many wonderful partners who have really inspired us in this whole process. You can't do it by yourself. And so PEN America, the Novo Women's Initiative, Amnesty International, other groups like that have just been so lifting. And so there's a place on the website where you can sign a petition on behalf of Nasrin from PEN America. And you can also, there are live links to a lot of other groups who are fighting for human rights in this world, and also supporting Nasrin. And by the way, there's also an upcoming event we're doing on the 26th with the American Bar Association that's going to bring an international coalition of people together again to talk about Nasrin, and there's information about that too.
Oh, that's great. So we're going to come back, but what we do is we break at the hour to respect people's time, folks that need to ring off, but don't. And especially if you weren't here at the beginning to see this music video, you want to stick around for that. Just a couple of quick announcements, and this is a surprise for us, so it'll be a surprise for you. We are really excited that our next program on the 13th of February is going to feature Payam Akhavan. He's going to return again, and the focus will be his book, In Search of a Better World, A Human Rights Odyssey. If you haven't read it, you want to get this book even before the chat, if you have an opportunity. Let's put a link for that in the chat as well. A recent review referring to the book explains that based on Payam's 2017 Massey lectures, he has written a most remarkable and moving autobiography, which immediately reached #1 for nonfiction on the Canadian bestseller list upon its publication, which was a couple of years ago, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it goes on to say, you cannot help but be profoundly touched on reading it. It's really memoirs, and it's an autobiography. Isn't that right? Have I said anything incorrectly, Payam?
No, not at all. No.
Well, we are, just so honored and delighted that you'll be returning. And following that in February, on the 27th, fourth week, we do this on the second and fourth week. We're going to have an extraordinary conversation around navigating the double epoch, thoughts on changing humanity's current plotline. We'll be talking about the essay by the same title with Hugh Locke, the author and president of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance in Haiti. He'll be joined by Dr. Hoda Mahmoudi, Baha'i Chair for Human Rights at the University of Maryland, and Dr. Arthur Dahl, president of the International Environmental Forum. I want to just lead out one of the things that has always struck me about your work, Jeff. You're in an arena doing amazing work with documentaries. And as you know, it's an arena that is not funded in the way big motion pictures are funded, and you're often working on a shoestring or what have you, but you always manage to attract, superstars who are willing to, I'm just going to say it, who are willing to really step up. And I think especially it's sort of reached a new level here with Nasrin. You Olivia Colman, who is just like incredible, Academy Award winning actress, magnificent. And Angelique Kidjo, Academy Award and Emmy Award nominee and winning music writers. It's just extraordinary. And what I'd like you to talk about is, just any experience in terms of what moved these folks to do their part, to step up and be part of it. It really sort of, I think, illustrates what we're talking about, the power of the inspiration of that contrast between darkness and light that Payam talked about. What are your thoughts?
Sure. Let me just squeeze in one little thing first, because just during the break, I got an email from Nasrin's husband, Reza Khandan, pointing out something that's a human rights concern in Brazil. And, you can't pay enough tribute to what wonderful people these are, and how blessed we are to have that kind of connection, and the fact that they never seem to be. They'd be the first to say that we're just regular folks, but the fact that they're always thinking of others. And that's just the perfect example. He just had to bring his wife back to prison a couple of days ago, but he's pointing out someone in need right now in Brazil. It's that's who these people are. First of all, getting a movie star of the caliber of Olivia Colman, it helps that you're producing partner, and your wife is one of the most respected casting directors in Hollywood, so she knows everybody. But still, there are a lot of famous people who will turn you down, and it also helps that Olivia Colman has a ginormous heart. And there's this great story about how we tried to get her several different times, and finally it turned out that in between doing one project and then having a family vacation and then going in for fittings for the next season of The Crown, she had a half a day available, and so I flew to the UK, and we did this recording session with her. And halfway through the recording session, she got a call from her husband because she forgot that she was supposed to have lunch with her mother-in-law at that same time. But she was just fabulous, and she just internalized that piece of Nasrin. And I can't curse on this, but I'll tell you that there's this one moment when we're doing the voiceover with Olivia, and I'm next to the engineer, and there's a glass booth, and she's on the other side of the glass, but you're talking back and forth, and she's doing one of the reads, and all of a sudden she just puts down her paper, and she goes, how do I say this without I have to censor myself. She puts down the paper, and she makes this famous curse word. She goes, blank, this is an amazing woman. And then she goes back to her read. And I just love that. But look, one last thing, which is that, yeah, there's the famous people, and like Angelique is just amazing. But it's everybody, and just like Nasrin is the face of political prisoners in Iran or the world right now, she represents thousands and thousands of people around the world in prison cells who are not well known and deserve their freedom as much as she does. And what's really inspiring is someone who isn't rich and isn't famous, but gives their all to help tell a story like this. And so we're grateful to a lot of people.
We met, Stephen and Lynn are very, very, very accomplished. I mean, they've won their Tony Awards for shows like Ragtime, which most people know, and Once on This Island, many, many, many things. And they were also collaborators several times with Terrence McNally, the playwright who wrote the books for these musicals, and he was the subject of our last film. So we had the opportunity to meet them while making the last film, and we didn't know. I mean, they're always working on a new Broadway show. I mean, these people are highly in demand, but Jeff sent them a rough cut of the film, and they called us immediately, said, we're in. And the thing about Stephen and Lynn, again, not unlike, obviously Angelique and Olivia, they're very care deeply about human rights. And the number of their songs from these shows that they've done have actually become sort of sung by many, many different organizations for different human rights things, gay rights and freedoms and all kinds of things. And so, you never know when you're going to connect with that one thing in people. So we're very grateful, and we love the song. And from the minute we heard it, we just thought it was just the greatest.
We've got some questions in the Q&A box, and here's one I want to just bring right to the top. Amin Faizpour is asking, in what ways can individuals morally, socially, and financially support Nasrin and other political activists in Iran on two levels, directly and personally, and culturally through efforts such as filmmaking? And I know that, like, in this whole crazy pandemic time, that theaters are closed and there are all kinds of challenges, and that you, Jeff and Marcia, brought on board an amazing public relations team that were sort of able to quickly, dancing through the challenges, figure out how to promote this. It's been extraordinary. And are you still, I know we did some fundraising for that campaign, and I know it needs to go through March. Maybe it can go even longer than that. If you're still doing that, tell us how folks can help. Tell us about it.
I appreciate that. Honestly, if you want to support the ongoing campaign that the film is the center of, please be in touch through the website or through David, and we'd be glad to tell you more about that. And have all your friends watch the music video on YouTube, because all that is continuing the dialogue and getting Nasrin's word out. but just there's so many groups, and you can find many of them on our website. Amnesty International, PEN America, PEN International. I don't want to not mention some because they're the American Bar Association's Center for Human Rights, immigrant rights group that Mojdeh works with. These are all trying to lift people's lives, and they're all pushing back against the political forces we see that really don't want to care about others. And so as much money as you have, you can give to these groups, and that actually makes a difference.
Well, let me just jump in and just really quickly and say, if anyone is interested in participating in the public relations initiative, which really is giving lift to her circumstances, her situation, by supporting that and learning more about how you can and why you can and where it goes, just send a note to info, maybe put this in the chat, info@baha'i.chat, and in the subject line, just write Nasrin PR. That's all you need to do. And then we'll reach out back to you, and we'll be happy to share that information. So I have a question here. I want to direct this first to you, Payam, and then any comments anybody else has. How does Iranian law show up as a violation not only of international law, but also the current regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran's constitution? How does it show up? And, how does that work? I mean, they're just like, it seems to me they're just, ignoring their own, the rules that they've set down.
That's a good question, David. The simple answer is that first of all, you need the rule of law, meaning to say you need impartial courts that respect the law rather than simply being used as an instrument of repression. And the Iranian revolutionary courts have been one of the fundamental instruments of repression. So in Iran, you don't go to the court to defend your rights. The perpetrators in Iran, perpetrators of human rights abuses, are rewarded with high political office, and the victims and their defense lawyers like Nasrin are the ones that end up in prison. So it's an upside down world, it's an inverted morality. But beyond that, some of the laws of Iran may not be that bad actually if they were respected. But the deeper problem is that in respect of the Baha'is, in respect of women and others, you have this medieval conception of Sharia law. And let's bear in mind that Sharia law has contested interpretations. There are different ways of interpreting Sharia law. But what you have is an authoritarian state that is using Sharia law as an excuse in the context of a modern state to use medieval concepts and imagery to stay in power, to pillage the resources of Iran through exceptional corruption, to repress all sorts of political dissent. So I think it's rather disingenuous that the Islamic Republic of Iran is, like they said of the Holy Roman Empire, it's neither Islamic nor a republic. It's more the Islamic Republic of gangster capitalism and torture chambers. So I think getting back to what people said about Islamophobia and the very negative portrayals of the Iranian people who have this rich ancient culture and civilization, we need to bear in mind that this is just about the banality of abuse of power, no more and no less. What you have there is an authoritarian regime, political elites that want to stay in power at all costs, and the same ones that are saying death to America and condemning Western civilization. All of their children are living in New York and Los Angeles and Toronto and Vancouver and London. They're driving fancy sports cars. They're going to casinos. They're partying with their friends. So this is all subterfuge and deception. And I think the Iranian people have woken up to that reality. The Iranian revolution, like all revolutions, devoured its own children. And now people have woken up and they realize that this revolution, this regime has nothing to do with something which is godly or divine or inspired, but it's just about the profanity and greed of power.
Wow. Other thoughts on that?
For me, it's so typical, right? You have so much, all the sanctions and the economic situation in Iran is terrible right now for the average citizen. But Payam is saying this, I agree, and then you've got these other people in power that are living just fine, that have everything they need. They don't care about what's happening to other people. They're happy. Their poverty does not, they're not living the same kind of poverty. They have everything.
Mojdeh, maybe you can discuss or talk to the legal restrictions on Baha'is in Iran, because there's so many different ways where an individual's life can be just crippled legally by sanctions against Baha'is. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So following the revolution that took place in 1979, a year and a half after that, there was another cultural revolution that took place. And after that, Baha'is were barred from accessing any higher education institutions. So Baha'is are not allowed to attend universities. And in different cities and towns throughout the country, even before universities, high school, and even before that, students have had many, many problems with their schools and have been expelled on numerous occasions. Baha'is also are not allowed to hold jobs with the government. They were all expelled from their posts. Some of those posts, even to date, they have not been able to replace those positions because they were so highly specialized, the people who were in those posts. And some of those people, not only were they fired, but also they were executed in the years that came, such as Dr. Yunus Mahmoudi, and many others. And the businesses have been confiscated. This is continuing to date. Wherever they see Baha'is that have succeeded to have a livelihood, they just go and attack, their businesses. They close the business. They have done it recently in several towns and even villages in Iran. Baha'i cemeteries have been desecrated in several places. Raids continue to happen, as that wonderful documentary that you made, Education Under Fire, shows the correspondent university that the Baha'is started has been under attack since its inception, and many of the professors and administrators were arrested. They received long sentences. This is again continuing to date, and just imprisonments. We have a number of Baha'is in prison today. Raids are ongoing, long sentences. So these are just some of the ongoing persecution.
Add one thing to what Mojdeh was saying, which brings us back to Nasrin Sotoudeh, because repeatedly, and she talked about this in some of the filming we did that's not in the actual film, she represented Baha'i business owners who had their businesses closed, sometimes torn down. And she talked about a number of successes she had where someone's license was yanked and she was able to get a business license reinstated for a Baha'i business owner. So those are the kind of battles she was doing day in and day out that don't necessarily get a lot of attention, but obviously, a whole family's livelihood is dependent on what she can do, and the successes, and the failures have real repercussions.
If I could just quickly add, David, to Mojdeh's very sort of thorough explanation. The basic premise in the Constitution of the Islamic Republic is that your human rights are conditioned by your belonging to a lawful religion, whatever it means to have a lawful religion. So based on really this very medieval interpretation of Sharia law, in Iran, you must be a member of one of the so-called peoples of the book. So Jews and Christians. Then by special dispensation, Zoroastrians are recognized as well. So the simple equation is that if your religion is not specifically listed, then you have no rights, because all rights flow from belonging to one of those groups. So this is the problem. In fact, it's a reflection of, an ideological kind of conformity imposed through violence. So this is not about religion, it's about modern ideology. So they are paying lip service to the idea of going back to an authentic Islamic identity, which is completely a myth. There was never an Islamic Republic ever in Iranian history. The history of Shia Islam from 1501 until the revolution in 1979 was what was called quietism, which was the separation of state and church. So Ayatollah Khomeini comes and he creates a myth that, oh, we're going back to the way it was, making Islam great again, right? So that's why I'm saying that this has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with some authentic search for identity or truth. And it has everything to do with abuse of power, using Islam as a pretext. And I would just add that some of the most notorious political prisoners in Iran today are ayatollahs, who are the highest ranking Islamic clerics. There are more Islamic clerics in prison today than there ever was under the time of the Shah. One of those is Ayatollah Masumi Tehrani, who has been one of the staunchest supporters of the Baha'is. And the regime is especially furious at Islamic clerics that do not stand with the regime and that basically expose this lie that somehow they are speaking in the name of the true and only interpretation of Islamic law.
I'm so glad you said that, because part of what we're trying to do here is counter the demonization of a country and the people. And so it's important, as you're criticizing rightly, these laws that are put in place, that many of the people who are out there on the front lines calling for democracy are Muslims themselves. And so just like, for Christianity or any other religion, there is no block that you can look at. And here in the States, we see all too many people, especially with a certain political party, who are saying we need to make this a Christian nation, or they're having this myth that it was always a Christian nation, which is just not true. And so we can see the same forces happening here in the United States.
And as you were giving that beautifully cogent argument, Payam, I was thinking along the same lines that this is not a new story. I mean, this is the story of othering and subjugating and gaining ascendancy over whoever. As you're talking, I was thinking about our own history, that, the Constitution before the amendments in its original form, dehumanizing people of color. And of course, this is going on everywhere. And this is the enemy of the notion, and you mentioned as well, Marcia, the oneness of who we are. This is, and the thing is, and you said this earlier, Payam, this is inevitable. I mean, we are going to get to a place of oneness and unity. The only question is, how long is it going to take, and how much suffering are we going to go through violating this universal principle? You can't break laws. You can't jump off a 50-story building and not come crashing to the ground. And these are laws you can't break as well. What are your thoughts about that? We'll just wrap up with each of you giving us last comments in that regard.
Well, I've already spoken too much, which should be a surprise from someone who's both a lawyer and a law professor, whose wordsmithing is his livelihood. But, well, I think you said it just perfectly yourself, David. The arc of history is bending towards justice, as the great Martin Luther King said. And those, whether it's people closer to home that believe that people of color are not equal to others because of the color of their skin, or those halfway across the world who are using religious belief and fanaticism to deny the humanity of others. The story is the same, that oneness is not just a far-fetched fantasy, it's a reality. We are one species, one race. We are all inspired by the same creator. We're all part of the same creation. The beauty of this era in history, as painful as our struggles, maybe as distressful as some of the image that we see, but the beauty of it is that there is this irresistible tide. And if you've seen the tide of the ocean coming, you realize there's nothing that can stop it. Even if it creeps up on the beach very slowly, it does so with this immense force and power. So I just want to end by once again thanking you and Mojdeh and Jeff and Marcia. Really, I think that Nasrin isn't just about a person, it's about an idea. It's about the power of human dignity. And in that sense, whether we're struggling in the streets of America to put an end to racial injustice, or struggling halfway across the world to end poverty and corruption, whatever arena of struggle that we're in, we're part of the same story and part of the same struggle.
Beautiful. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but if anybody would like to just share any last comment, you're welcome to.
I just want to thank you, David, and thank you, Payam, Jeff, and Marcia, and just want to say a word about Jeff. Didn't get a chance to say it in the beginning. Marcia, we haven't had a chance to work together, but I'm sure this is true for you as well. And Jeff, something that is particularly special about you is the humanity you put into your work. And, I've done a lot of work with, documentary makers, and it just has not been the same quality. That empathy that you spoke about, you truly have learned that, and you put that into practice. And I remember that the time we spent working on Education Under Fire, we spoke a lot about what my life had been like, and the childhood experiences and trauma and all of that. And it was fine for me to go through that, but just witnessing your humanity, your kindness and pure heart, that's what brought me to tears. And it's that very special quality about you. And I just wanted to thank you for all the great work that you do.
That is so lovely, really. Such a wonderful comment. I want to thank each of you for joining us here today. It's been a very rich conversation, just incredible. All of you, each of you, Marcia, Payam, Mojdeh, Jeff. And as we're signing off here, just briefly, again, we are just learned this today, but we're very excited that our next program will feature Payam. He'll be back to share some stories from his autobiography, a bestseller. That's on February 13th. Also, if anybody is here that doesn't have a connection with a Baha'i and would like to maybe have a bit of guidance in terms of how they might begin their investigation of the faith, we have a program called Baha'i Guide. And all you need to do is just send us a note, an email, info@baha'i.chat, and just write guide in the subject line, and we'll actually invite you to a one-on-one Zoom or phone or whatever you'd like conversation, a very personal, to kind of get to know you a bit and see what direction we might help guide you to for your own investigation. So thank you all again for joining us today. Thank you to our guests for being here. Thank you also to Josefina for your amazing, we could not do this without you, work. And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much.